You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio. Welcome to the Bitter Medicine Podcast, where it's all about Black empowerment. Our show focuses on Black news and entertainment, arts, science, economics, history, people, and strategies that uplift, empower, and motivate Africans within the diaspora. And now, your host, whose favorite color is black, Goku.
Well, welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. I am your host, Koku. Glad to be back here again, having another episode of the podcast. I want to thank everyone who's here already. I see that Derico Kupu Photography is in the room saying, "Peace, family." Hit the like button to show attendance. I appreciate you being here, Derico. I hope others follow your advice. Hit the like button. Show that you're here. You know, speak up too. Sometimes, a lot of times, there's folks here who aren't speaking up. You know, we're a good crew. Just speak up and say, "Hey, I'm here." You know what I mean? So, before we get into today's paper, which is about the 4M curriculum, a way to shape the future, this paper was done by Barbara Sizemore, who I have immense respect for. We'll talk about her in a second. First, I want to remind you guys that this show is a part of a podcast network called KWAZ Radio. You guys should be tuning in to other shows on the podcast network, like...
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-Black perspective, where Black problems are addressed with Black solutions.
Also, check out the Queen's Council podcast, also on KWAZ Radio. So I want to talk about Barbara Sizemore just a tad bit. Barbara Sizemore, I think I mentioned the other day she might still be alive, but no, actually she passed away in 2004. She was born in December 1927, passed away in July 2004. An American teacher and researcher in the field of education. 1973, she became the first African-American woman to head the public school system in a major city. And she was elected superintendent of District of Columbia Public Schools, right? Inspiring career. Her career began in Chicago Public Schools, teaching English and reading in elementary and high schools from 1950 to 1963, and serving as principal of elementary and high schools from 1963 to 67. In 69, she was named district superintendent of the Woodlawn Experimental School. She was also a member of the adjunct faculty at Northeastern Illinois University from 65 to 71. Sizemore taught at the University of Pittsburgh from 75 to 92. It was there that she began her research on low-income African-American students and standardized tests, which she continued as Dean of the School of Education at DePaul University in 1992. Sizemore's first book, a version of her doctoral thesis titled The Ruptured Diamond, The Politics of the Decentralization of the District of Columbia Public Schools, was published in 1981. Her second book, Walking in Circles, The Black Struggle for School Reform, was published posthumously in 2008. So I just wanted to give you guys a little idea on who the sister is. If you join the Discord and you go to Conscious Videos, if you join the Discord and go to Conscious Videos, you will be able to see a video or two of her that I posted personally, where she's talking about the school system and how to educate African children. All right, I see Kevin Care 42 is in the room. Greetings to you, sir. Glad to see you back here again. So make sure you guys go over to the Discord. If my Discord wasn't moving so slowly, I'll post the link, but I'll post it in a few minutes, I guess. Go to the Discord and go to the Conscious Videos channel, and you'll be able to see this lady live talking about educating our young black kids. I know Amos Wilson also talks about unlocking the brilliance of African children too, but I think that she had a lot of actual practical experience with it. And so I wanted to read this paper. It might be a little bit surprising because this paper is not like any kind of Pan-African type paper necessarily or at all, but it, you know, it gives you some insight into curriculum building, things you should consider. And of course, the project that the Bitter Medicine Podcast has is creating a new African-centered curriculum. So any insight we can get from someone like her, I think is useful. So this paper says human variation is the enduring enigma of American public education. Our educational curricula are based on norm reference data, preparing the teacher and the administrator to conform to the average, to teach the average, and to perpetuate the myth that a teacher can indeed instruct a group. The age-graded norm referenced Anglo-centric curriculum is so much a part of the American educational scene that most people take it for granted as an inevitable given. And it is almost impossible for a person to conceive of a school organized in any other fashion. Resultingly, schools have become rigid and inflexible. Right? Incredibly, the curriculum of a diverse population is based on the characteristics, life experiences, and culture of one minority, the Anglo-Saxon affluent Protestant group. Characteristically, the monolingual, monocultural, and unidimensional curriculum which created cell block classrooms with single age groupings evolved. Interestingly, most teachers see themselves as instructors of these groups rather than as interactors with students who are individual human beings. Already you can see how dope she is. NY Sports Archives in the room, peace to NY Sports Archive. But already you can see how kind of dope-minded she is in terms of having observed the classroom and being able to point out its shortcomings when it comes to what she's going to talk about later is like multicultural education. But of course, we are not focused on multicultural. We're focused on our culture, right? We're focused on African children. But it's still interesting to see how she knocks down the errors in the way they teach. But understand that these are errors when it comes to us if we follow it. These are not errors for the people that it's intended for, right? In 1972, David Hawkins clarified the educational significance of human difference in his seminal work published in the 71st Yearbook of the National Society for the Study of Education. He explained the phenomenon of human differences and how we must accommodate it in our learning structures if we plan to provide equal educational opportunity for all the children of all the people. Hawkins gives us three postulates for human nature. Quote, men or women are equal. Men and women are free, and men and women are rational. All of the postulates hinge on the first proposition. Hawkins explained it in this way. Without equality among men, there is no profound problem of politics. The obviously superior will rule. Without freedom, there is no deep problem of how the rulers will rule. They will rule by force or by psychological manipulation. Without nationality, there is no alternative to force or manipulation, no meaningful debate over ends, no problem of consent or consensus. That's heavy. I like it. I like it. You know, I realized something the other day too, that these episodes that I did, I'm sure at some point someone's gonna write their whole PhD thesis on some of the stuff that I've presented, by the way. And that's fine. Hawkins states that the central problems of educational theory and research cannot be defined without consideration of these postulates. This paper will discuss 1, the basic theory presented by Hawkins; 2, the kinds of curricula, methodological and administrative changes required by schools in order to bring about equality, freedom, and rationality; and 3, application of the findings to the 4M curriculum: multilingual, multicultural, multimodal, and multi-dimensional. All right, so that's what the 4M curriculum stands for: multilingual, multicultural, multimodal, and multidimensional. So this brings us to a section of paper called the problem of equality. Right, the problem of equality. In the chat room, NYC Beauty says we need to educate our kids about being black first. We must teach them to choose their own over others no matter what. We must build pride and loyalty into them. That's exactly what we got to do. The thing is that we need the roadmap for which to follow. And the roadmap is the curriculum. You want to unify black folks? Let them learn similarly. Let them learn similarly. Let them learn how to solve the problems in their locality and cross-talk with each other to say, hey, your problem is similar to the problem that we had. That's when you bring about some unity. Right? It's in the education. It's in the plan. Right? Follow it, and it'll lead you to togetherness. So the problem of equality. One dilemma is the fact that in actuality, we find that men and women are often unequal, unfree, and irrational. The postulates, therefore, are moral prescriptions, a hoped-for view, a wish that people's behavior toward themselves and other people will improve, become better, more cognizant of humanity and humanness. Hawkins reminds us that we think of adults as equal, free, and rational, but rarely comprehend children with those capacities. The basic postulates, he says, must obtain over the range of infancy to adulthood. Such an idea would leave us free to think of children and students as teachers as well as learners in the teaching learning process. Right? There's a comment I can make here as an educator. One of the problems that you see is when you know the old adage, you give an inch, people take a mile. So one of the problems you see that's kind of problematic is that because information is so free today, right? Because information is so free today, a lot of learners think they're on the same level as the teacher. There is something positive to be said about the ancient traditions of learning and the paradigm of student-teacher. If you start to relax that paradigm between student and teacher, you're going to end up with students who don't respect, who are not respectful of the teacher, but more importantly, who are not humble enough to understand that to learn, you have to sit at the foot of the teacher first. And as you learn and as you add your individualism to what you're learning, right, you then find unique and new ways to go about the instruction. And when you become the master, the previous teacher or master has to now listen to you. But at that point, he's earned your respect because you were respectful and went through the process of learning. And I think what's happening now in society at large is that the learners don't anymore humble themselves and allow themselves to learn from the master. Now, if that's true in society at large, and it's doubly true in our society. And when you have that, you have some destruction going on, right? So I get the idea of the children being seen as teachers as well, because hey, we could always learn something, and we could learn from anyone. But I think there's a time honored, and I think it's a proven tradition that, you know, the student must, at least in the beginning or at the start, or for the most part, must see themselves as a student. You see what I'm saying? Kevin Kerr says we have the resources for that. Instead of giving outsiders our money, we can invest in our children's future and break this cycle, this code of pride and loyalty. NYC Beauties agrees. Black Excellence says we must keep it strictly black. I agree. NYC Sports Archives gives the muscle, flexing muscle symbol. And I agree with all that, you know. If you're new here, please click the like button and subscribe. If you've been here before, by all means, hit the like button. We have more listeners than likes. Hit the like button. All right. Once again, I appreciate all of you who are here. If you're returning, I really appreciate you. If you're new, I appreciate you too. Please come back and hang with us more in the future. New episodes every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. All right. New episodes every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, 8 p.m. Eastern time. All right. So check us out. Our confusion has led us to believe that children are all alike and that you can teach each with the same materials. Now, this is facts. The same thing at the same time for the same reasons under the same circumstances. This is untrue. And this is a great point. This is a great point. This cookie cutter approach to teaching doesn't work. And that's why there's advocates for smaller classrooms. Because with smaller classrooms, it's supposed to be the case that the teacher, the instructor, can spend more time with the individual students and can get to know the student, can present the materials to the student in the way that the student prefers, right? And so I have to agree with this point. Hawkins argues the following, but congenital variety among persons modified by early experience is not single track. Like biological variety in general is many dimensional, its graph is profile. And whereas a single well-defined curricular track will spread children out in a long line of march, there's also a variance in the learning abilities of a single child along alternative tracks, assuming for a moment that these are made commensurable by leading toward a common goal. Thus, by a proper assignment of tracks in a way which complements congenital variety, the variance of learning rates can be reduced and with no decrease of any individual rates. Every teacher knows that any group of individuals will learn unequally, and a large variance generally accrues in any class of students given an identical pedagogical track. Teachers don't know how to interpret this phenomenon or how to cope with it. Our usual manner is to term some of the students as fast and the others as slow, to rank them hierarchically as inferiors and superiors with test scores and grades. And that's what they're doing to our people. This is what they're doing to our people, right? You saw Umar Johnson on the Breakfast Club recently, I'm assuming, And you hear him talk about this stuff repeatedly, and this is what they do, right? They know that they're teaching this layman's unbalanced education, right? There's from this unbalanced curriculum, but they don't care, because the unbalanced curriculum is going to maintain the unbalanced power that they have. How many of you were artistic in school? Not autistic, but artistic in school, right? And you were great at it. But because you only was so at, say, math or, social studies or some shit like that, they had you pegged as a slow learner. I may have even tried to call in them peoples to evaluate you and all kind of stuff like that, right? They know what they're doing, right? Hawkins points out that for each child there exists in principle some unique optimal curricular track for such a kind that in a group where learning is thus individually optimized, the variance of attainment will be negligible. He explicates this theory as follows. I hope it is clear here that I am not speaking of tracks as prefabricated, as though they could be defined as a textbook on quote-unquote alternative tracks. Mathematicians will recognize that I'm speaking abstractly of education as a function, or as a functional, over two domains of variables which are essentially nonlinear in their relations to each other. We cannot speak of an optimal track in general except with reference to a particular learner, or an optimal learner except with reference to a particular track. Of course, there are some universally bad tracks. So one of the things I always think about when we're talking about building an African-centered curriculum is that the components of the curriculum, right, have to line up with how you unlock the genius in Black children, like Dr. Amos Wilson would say, right? It has to connect you back to connect the child back to their people, their traditions, their culture, the environments that they inhabit, right? But importantly, it also has to incorporate the different styles of learning. I've talked about it many times on this show. I grew up, I went to high school with kids who just didn't have the mind for like bookwork, it would seem. But if you took them out to do carpentry or what we call woodwork, you took them out to do technical drawing or art, right? They excelled, and that was all they wanted to do, right? I see in the chat room, Derico Cooper Photography said something interesting. The first interesting thing he said is the things we learn must have a reason for being learned. Absolutely. What you learn must be able to, you must be able to turn around and use it in your environment and control the environment around you. The second thing he said that's interesting, he said much of what is taught is useless knowledge. Well, that depends on where you're at in life. Right? I was showing my son the other day that if you understand Pythagoras' theorem in math, you could apply that to construction. You could apply that to plumbing even, right? You could apply that in different areas, correct? So it depends on how you live your life, right? If a lot of people had paid attention to biology, to science in high school, we wouldn't have all the folks denying a pandemic right now. A lot of that ignorance is a scientific ignorance, right? NYC Beauty says, I'm learning more as an adult than when I was in school. I always felt that they were teaching was useless and boring. I thrived in the arts and history. You cannot learn everything in 45 minutes. See, that's the thing. The idea is that you're not supposed to learn everything in school, really. You're supposed to learn in school and then apply it to your real environment. And the learning in school is supposed to be done in such a way that it inspires you to keep wanting to learn. Listen, in my time on the earth, I've had, especially since I came to the States, I've had interests in so much different things, and I've had the time to actually look up my interests. Right? You guys are photographers, NYC Beauties and Derico Cooper, right? You know, I've looked into photography. I've looked into how can you use principles in photography in like drawing a comic book, right? In how you ink and frame a scene in a comic book. What I'm getting at is that your learning in school, if you have good teachers around you, will drive you to learn more. But if the curriculum is bad and the teachers suck, you're lost. And that's what happens to our people in the public school system. The curriculum is bad, and we got these fucking Europeans who don't care about us, especially these European females, who are teaching in these schools, and they're scared of our children. They're 5'1", and so some of our boys are down there 6 foot tall in grade 8, if not 6 foot tall, and they're afraid of them. They criminalize them. This is why we have the school to prison pipeline, right? Anyway, Hawkins discovers a new postulate to deal with this dilemma, and that is human beings are inconsumable in their differences. Further, he suggests that inconsumability implies that although individuals can be compared and ranked in many ways, such comparisons are vector rather than scalar in type. Additionally, it implies that generally one individual does not excel another in all relevant dimensions. Quote, does not in mathematical language dominate him. It just makes sense. Hawkins's interpretation views people as congenitally varied rather than unequal, posing questions about the differential effect of dissimilar environments in relation to the kinds of learning each supported or inhibited. Local and dependent curricula and instructional choices must make, quote, the curricular spiral tangent at many points to the individual lives of children and to the educative resources of their total environment, which they know or can be helped to discover. Hawkins is certain that children can learn equally in general as they can learn differently. Quote, the more constraints there are towards single-track pre-programmed instruction, the more predictably will the many dimensions of individual variety, congenitally and individually evolved, express themselves as a large rank order variance in learning. Equal opportunity can be affected only to the extent that we can institutionalize equal status in our educational programs for all of the children of all of the people. As long as dominance interpreted on a single axis of inferiority and superiority prevails, we will not reach our high and lofty goals of universal education and ubiquitous literacy. Freedom and rationality requires a change. That's a word right there. Freedom and rationality require a change. Let's bring us to a section called freedom and rationality. In the chat room, I see Achieve Mindset has graced us with their presence. Right? Kevin Care 42 says, I was lucky at a young age to have black teachers who cared. When I got to junior high school, it was a nightmare. You had a lot of Muzungu teachers, women especially, that did not care. Absolutely. You know, Black Excellence says to Kevin K482, they never cared about us. They could not get a job in the suburbs, so the plague were cast upon us. They were very hateful. The truth of the matter, Black Excellence, is that oftentimes they could get a job in the suburbs, you know. What really happened was most of them are not educators, actually. Most of them are lawyers and stuff, and they join these programs where they get half of their student loan knocked off, half or more of the student loan knocked off when they come down to black schools or black neighborhoods and teach. But the thing is, they bring their hatefulness. Ain't nothing more hateful than a white woman, let's be honest. Achieve Mindset said hi. I say hi back to you. Achieve Mindset says mathematics is very important. Absolutely. Mathematics is the foundation. Right? Drigo Cooper Photography says we must teach our own people. However, at the same time, we must be able to make a living. He goes on to say we need to have classes on the history of mathematics. You know, and that's why I do these type of shows. That's why I have the project. You know, any and everyone can jump in and help. Some of you photographer folks, you can help design some curriculum for a photography student. I'm here. I just need the folks to jump on in, right? You know, that's what we need to do. We need people with these expertise in mathematics or what have you, to jump on in and help us build a curriculum. Drigo Cooper is asking the question, who came up with this mathematics? What was it designed to do? I'll let you guys talk about that in the chat room. I'll continue with the reading. Freedom and rationality. All the actions of men and women are subject to constraints and contingencies, most of which they cannot anticipate. But within such boundaries of freedom, will can be exerted. Hawkins describes this reality as having freedom by degrees, quote, the capacity to use human knowledge in deliberate choice, end of quote. Only when freedom can be exercised does an individual possess it. Therefore, freedom enables human beings to act in ways which preserve and stabilize themselves. They also act in ways to reproduce themselves. Good education, then, expands the experiences and knowledge so that it is not possible to draw a sharp distinction between self-preservation and self-development. They become the same. I like that. Freedom requires rationality, the exercise of reason, the ability to make intelligent choices among varying alternatives, right? Piaget demonstrated the presence of rational thought even in children. His thought is inherent in Hawkins's conceptualization of rationality. It is the tendency manifest from early infancy toward the organization of perception and behavior in terms of a hierarchy of invariant structures, which is open at the same time to a reorganization of those structures as still higher levels of organization may require. Hawkins believes that teachers understand the intellectual process of children through an observant mapping of their behavior, a reading of their behavior in terms of models of learning which we ourselves have built. He says, quote, a teacher will not try irreverently to, quote unquote, explain, but instead will try to provide from many sources that which will enrich the empirical matrix of a child's thought, or will suggest analogies and connections from previous experiences which are, at the moment, unretrievable by the child himself. And that's the truth, right? To perform in such a way, a totally different kind of organization and structure is needed. The organization of the school today is political rather than educational. Politics can be defined as management of conflict between groups warring over the allocation of scarce resources. Let me read that again. I like that. Politics can be defined as management of conflict between groups warring over the allocation of scarce resources. Education is an allocative process too. The issues in the Bakke case are examples. There are few spaces for medical training in this country, although our people have a great need for medical service. Why is there a scarcity? There's a scarcity so that the income of doctors can remain high. Capitalism works on a supply-demand paradigm, and it's competitively interdependent. This means that when commodities or services are scarce, the cost is high and the price goes up. It also means that when A wins, B loses. The paradigm requires losers. The educational system is a sorting process which determines who will win and who will lose. Therefore, the decision that dominance and an superiority axis will prevail is a political decision, not an educational one. This here is right up the alley that I'm talking about. Right? That's the problem with education. Education is tied to capital and capitalism. And if it's tied to capitalism, capitalism is all about haves and the have-not, or really the winners and the losers. Right? The education system that our children go to in the public school system is to create losers of our children. Right? Rico Cooper Photography says we must see ourselves as the originators of knowledge. Absolutely. Who taught Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, and the boys? People that look like us, says the Rico Cooper Photography. He's absolutely correct. Right? NYC Beauty says to Dorico, we are the origin of these sciences and mathematics. Dorico Cooper Photography says talking about they were correcting them. Right? We have to understand the game. We have to understand really how important education is. Our future survival depends on the education our children today and tomorrow receive. If for whatever reason you can't help but to send them to the public school system, at least at home, have a curriculum for your children to follow that pushes them to be fully Afrocentric, that pushes them to be loyal to their people, to be the future leaders and not to sell out their people, that give them an education at home that helps them understand and learn how to solve the problems that they have, not the problems that the world have. So that's the game that we get caught up in. We want to help everyone because of the education system that we went through. No, we want an education system that funnels our children to help in their community, right? I have issues with HSBCUs, HSBCUs, that's a bank and a university. HBCUs, and I heard Umar talk about this on the Breakfast Club a couple days ago. But you got to give it credit that even though they are working within the same Eurocentric paradigm for the most part, you got to give it credit that most of the black folks, black professionals, over 50% of them, right, actually come from the HBCUs, right? Now it's time that we change up the education, the quality of education, All right, even before we get to the tertiary level, let's change the secondary level of education. Let's change the elementary level of education. And we do that by creating a curriculum that absolutely works in our favor. All right, to continue. Obviously, if we are to affect positive educational changes for all the children of all the people, we must decide some very basic questions about the kind of social order in which we wish to live. It is important to build a model of the society we want the schools to help create. Or is it important to build a model of the society we want the schools to help create? That's an important question. Should these models possess the character, the features, and the configurations that we expect to reach through our schools? How do we want people to treat each other? Do we want full employment where everyone has the opportunity to work? Do we want to have enough doctors so that everyone can enjoy good health care? Answering these questions demands a rigorous analysis of systemic and organizational rationality. By the way, I want to go back and say something about capitalism, especially as it relates to education. You see, this is where the capitalism that these dogs follow through with is a capitalism you want to avoid. There is a world where you could have learned people who are doctors, engineers, who are paid fairly for their work, because fairly for their contributions to society. There's room for the innovator to be compensated well for innovating, for changing our daily lives, right? Like, for example, you go back far enough in history, the dude who came up with the wheel, he really changed the lives of the people at that time, right? The folks who are innovating, who are lessening burden of society, of our society, can be handled in a way that reflects what they're giving to society, right? Capitalism doesn't have to be winners and losers, right? There's ways for people, there's systems for people. The original Ubuntu system that we had actually did that, right? Everyone was covered. Everyone had their basic needs met. But if you were an innovator or whatever, you got more. You got some extra, and that's something that we have to start thinking about, right? An economic system where we're all winners. We're all winners, right? To continue. We have this section called Organizational Rationality in the Public Schools. August 14, 1978 issue of Education USA state that programs in the nation's high schools have become increasingly diverse, but the organization of the schools has remained very traditional. Thus, while the typical high school offers a minimum of 3 off-campus alternatives to giving credit for coursework, almost all schools still schedule courses in half-hour periods and give letter grades. I think Kevin Care 42 was the one who mentioned he couldn't learn enough in 45 minutes, right? Katz and Kahn make it abundantly clear that organizations have 3 significant structural properties. 1, system openness and differentiation from the environments. 2, elaboration of the structure and separation of the organization into potentially conflicting segments because of the hierarchical differences in power and reward. And 3, variation in functional requirements of organizational substructures. Additionally, they state, organizations differ with respect to the permeability of their boundaries. Some organizations have sharply defined, rigid boundaries. Entrance into such systems and exit from them are not the decisions of the individual. Prisons, schools, and asylums are such organizations. They are not as subject to continuing influence from the external environment as are others. Prisons, schools, and asylums are such organizations. Furthermore, Katz and Kahn describe rigid organizations more likely to develop highly differentiated internal structures, which maintain their character and resist outside forces. Often the power in these organizations is vested in the top echelon and an oligarchical rather than a democratic system emerges. Since people within any system make contributions of varying effort and value, they are likely to be rewarded differentially. In order to talk about continuing education for change, to include the participants, parents, administrators, citizens, teachers, and students, on an equal basis in goal setting and planning, to accommodate the multilingual, multicultural characteristics of the American population in the curriculum, and to make provisions for the actuality of human variation in the student population, we must consider these basic organizational traits. Moreover, organizational structure must be compatible with what we know about human growth and development. Bruner says that instruction should assist growth. Instruction should assist growth. If this is so, what should a constructive, responsive teaching/learning environment be like? Saracen says that any attempt to introduce change into the school setting requires, among other things, changing the existing regularities in some way. Several questions should be answered, he advises. For example, what is the rationale for the regularity? What is the universe of alternatives that should be endorsed? If we admit that every human being is unique and different with differing rates of growth and patterns of development, then we must discard several regularities. 1, traditional school hours. 2, norm reference curricula based on the quote-unquote little racetrack concept instead of the curricular network. 3, norm reference testing instead of criterion reference testing. 4, banking/deposit pedagogy. And 5, hierarchical grouping and administration. Right? Get rid of it. Schools must be planned to administer educational policy and to meet the needs of the learners rather than political goals, which meet the needs of the society, administrators, school board members, and teachers. Right? For a brief second during the decade of the 1960s, consideration was given to the creation of a curricular network underlying Hawkinson's preference for, quote, constant choice and invention, end of quote. But because the structure of the organization of the schools did not change, and because the training of teachers did not change, these temporary arrangements were thwarted. Now there is a trend away from substantial radical change in the curriculum as school board members swing to the right in politics. The internalization of Anglo-centric socio-cultural traditions and values is the prerequisite to social acceptability and access to the political structure. When the English gained political control over the colonies, they used this power to promote and maintain the hegemony of English instructions and culture, and to discourage the continuation of lifestyles and values that were divergent. This process of acculturation became the principal strategy for educating the American child. One quick note, one of the issues you would have with Barbara Sizemore is, and you know, the same can be said about Amos Wills, the same can be said about most black educators, as they focus on changing the American fool system. And the intent they have is to make it more multicultural, right? You share the space with Africans because you have Africans in the school system. Africans should be learning about, you know, Africans and Africa, etc. Share the space. Move over a little bit. You have Hispanics that make up a certain percentage of the American society. Let's talk about their shit for a minute. You know, move over a bit, right? And again, I'm sorry to say it, but that doesn't make sense. You want your people fully engaged, fully immersed in learning about themselves and their people. Just like these Europeans want their children to learn about themselves and their people. The only solution is to start talking about black education, black schools, black curriculums, etc. Make sure you guys hit the like button. Make sure you guys hit the like button. I want to thank everyone who's here with me again tonight, especially you guys in the chat room. The chat room really makes this worth the while for me personally to do a live stream. That is, Dorico Kubo Photography says we developed these mathematical formulas because we knew it was not practical, for example, to take a measuring tape and measure the distance from Earth to the moon, etc. Absolutely. Absolutely. The Achieve Mindset is here again. Says there needs to be an open source Pan-African education curriculum. Well, this is what we've been talking about. Achieve Mindset. Achieve Mindset, you're on the Discord, right? I think you're on the Discord. This is what we've been talking about. And we can do the folks who are on the Discord, we could all contribute to making this happen. You know? And by contribute, I mean what we don't know, we can pull in the people who are African centered, right? Pan-Africanist, hopefully, right? And we could together build this curriculum. But one of the things we got to stop saying, and I'm not saying this to cast any aspersions on Achieve Mindset or anyone else, but it's something I've noticed too much. As a people, we like to say, oh, so and such is doing that. The problem with that is that when you look into what so and such is doing, it's cool, but it ain't. And I've heard that too much. Oh yeah, so and such is doing that work already. Yeah, but what are they doing? And I'm telling you now, if they're doing it alone, which seems to be the hurdle that a lot of folks with this mindset of building a new African or Pan-African centered education curriculum, right? Is if you're doing it alone, it's going to be too vague. It's going to be too vague for the learner. If you're on the Discord long enough, you know that I put out an example of an African-centered curriculum, and all power to my man and them who put that together. I'm not trying to cast any aspersions on those folks. I appreciate them because they gave me something to look at, and others on the Discord some months ago to look at and critique. But the overwhelming majority of people who responded to that critique of that African-centered curriculum said it's too vague. And I believe it's too vague because one or two people that put it together. But if we got teams of people working on subjects and subject matter, etc., we can make a curriculum that's so dope. And the next step is not just to make the curriculum, but the next step is for us to start pooling our resources and making the textbooks for our people. See, we overlook that too much. We got to start making the textbooks as well for our people. Right? So, yeah, there needs to be an open source Pan-African education curriculum. Join the Discord if you haven't, but I believe Achieve Mindset is there. And let's do it. Let's incorporate some more brothers and sisters from across the continent, the Caribbean, the UK. Right? Let's get it in there. Right? Dorico Kubo Photography says, I will be a key player in developing the photography curriculum. That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about. If you join the Discord, if you listen to this episode, you join the Discord. When you come on the Discord, say, hey, I'm a mathematician. How can I help? Hey, I'm a biologist. How can I help? And let me tell you all something. Once we get good numbers of people involved, I'm talking, 5 people per subject area, whatever. The workload isn't going to be as daunting as you think it is. But if you leave it to one person to do, it's going to be daunting, right? So Derico Cooper, I appreciate you, man. Talk to me in the Discord. Let's figure out what resources you're going to need, right? What resources you think you're going to need, how many people you think you're going to need to help with that, etc. You and I will work together to get the numbers that you need and whatever resources you think is necessary. NYC Beauty says kids have to like what they're learning to be efficient. This outdated Prussian system is one of fitting the circle into a square. Everyone learns at a different pace. Absolutely. Drigo Cooper Darby says, I also look forward to creating some content as a collective. Where are the writers in the chat? You know what, Derico? I want you to go on, since you asked a question here, I want you to go into the Discord at some point, right? And just add everyone and say, yo, where are the writers? Because I mentioned this on the show some time ago, and since you've been a regular in the chat room, I've also mentioned it. I think the first night you were here, I mentioned it. That, it's for us to do the work. Create the collectives. One of the things I like is I like the fact that I have several photographers in the room here. There's a couple of writers on the Discord I know, right? I want the artisans to be involved. As you know, there's a book I have that says artisans will rule the world, right? To continue with the reading, Sekou Touré describes culture as the end product of the struggle which men and women wage against nature and other men and women for control of the land. Since the Anglo-Saxon Protestants control most of the production in the United States and dominate the distribution of resources, they strive to relegate all other cultures to an inferior symbolic universe. There's my usual ambulance passing by. This is achieved by excluding them from the common curriculum. Consequently, it is Anglo-Saxon literature which is emphasized in schools. Anglo-Saxon music, poetry, and art which are glorified and exalted. This situation reflects the lack of cultural pluralism and multicultural education in the educational system, even where academic freedom should be demonstrated. Because educational programs emerge from social science research and are constructed to maintain the symbolic universe which preserves the superiority and supremacy of this dominant group. Alternate universes must be consigned to inferiority or absurdity, right? When I hear that word absurdity at the end, you know what I think about? I think about how they push classical music, Mozart and all that shit on people, right? But they call it classical music. They give it some gravitas, right? But African classical music, they call it jazz. And I guess you could say we've owned it. But jazz, right? They're trying to make it seem absurd, right? Thus, Anglo-Saxon Protestant values are used as a kind of baseline to determine what is normal and abnormal. During the 1960s, the Black Cultural Revolution raised questions about this dominance of the common curriculum. These queries led to the installation of Black and ethnic studies programs in many universities, colleges, and high schools. Since that time, attempts have been made to achieve cultural pluralism in curriculum development, and multicultural education has become the means. However, the political struggle now is between this effort and the reactionary drive for quote-unquote competency-based education, sometimes called back to basics and testing. These programs seek a rigidly single-track system which is assumed to guarantee equality of opportunity. However, inequality and ineffectively that opportunity in question impinges on the lives of diverse human beings. Accommodating the individual and unique needs of the learner is more costly than implementing competency-based education and back to the basics, both of which assume that all children need the same things at the same time. Moreover, it is altogether unclear as to what is basic except reading, writing, and arithmetic. Is football basic? Citizenship? No time during the past 50 years have public schools abandoned the teaching of reading, writing, and arithmetic, nor do the present competency-based programs specify any changes that are new. What they do is make the curriculum requirements more structured, more rigid, more mechanistic, and less creative. Increasingly, equal educational opportunity must begin with the individual and private learning prescriptions issued to the individual learner. Only then can equal chances obtain. Only then can equal chances obtain. This leads us to a new curriculum. So the new curriculum is the 4M curriculum, and we're at that section of the paper talking about the 4M curriculum. Like Derico Cooper says in the chat room, hit the like button to show attendance. Right? Hit the like button to show attendance. If you're new here and you're a writer or you're artistic or painter, photographer, whatever, you've never introduced yourself before, write that in the chat room. All right? If you have expertise in coding or some area of science or writing or language, some African language, let us know. Right? This is the stuff that we need. We need our children to be multilingual, right? Etc. I'm gonna take a quick station ID break, and on the other side, we'll read this section called the 4M curriculum.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Make sure you guys also check out the Queen's Council podcast, also on KWAZ Radio. Make sure you guys, do just that. Make sure you guys follow KWAZ Radio on YouTube. We're getting ready to start putting out some snippets of different shows on the channel. All only on the KWAZ Radio YouTube channel. So you guys make sure to follow so that you get those snippets that, a lot of times snippets of shows actually hit real well. All right. So make sure you guys follow KWAZ Radio as well. The 4M curriculum. The 4M curriculum is multilingual, multicultural, multimodal, and multi-dimensional in its focus. So, chances are what Robert Sizemore is going to talk about is a curriculum that shares space with other people. I, on the other hand, I want to create a curriculum that doesn't share space with anyone. That we learn what we need to learn about ourselves, our community, our traditions, and about the problems that we have and how to fix them. Multilingual to me could be us learning other African languages, right? Swahili is like the main one everyone talks about. When I spoke to Obadeli Cambone, he mentioned some other languages from West Africa. That'll probably be more ideal for Africans in the diaspora, right? But that's what we should be talking about, right? So, but I will continue with what she talks about, the 4M curriculum. It is most appropriate since a philosophy of ethnic pluralism must pervade the schools before any ethnic study can prevail. A 4M curriculum does not mean that the study of culturally different groups is appended to the Eurocentric curriculum. Okay, she corrected me there. But rather that the linear and scalar thrust is replaced by one that is spiral and vector. Instruction is conducted through 4 symbol systems instead of 1 or 2. The 4 are, hold on, let me make sure I get this. The 4 are words, images, notes, and numbers. The content subjects are framed through the spiral arrangements of concepts so that all men and women march through history, literature, language, music, art, science, and mathematics with equal status. Defining curriculum as the total educational environment, it is what is taught, the content, how it is taught, the methodology, and how it is organized for implementation, administration. Multimodal strategies change the grouping practices of the age-graded norm reference curriculum so that both horizontal and vertical organization are affected. Horizontal organization is the way students are grouped by the teacher for instruction in the classroom. Vertical organization determines the pathway from entry to exit. Instead of placing students in cells according to ages and grades, totally independent of their achievement, interest, talent, assets, liabilities, and skill deficiencies, they will be placed in groups according to multimodal families, many ages in a family. So that reminds me of what I talked about when I talked about Booker T. Washington, and the way that he did education is similar to, say, how my grandparents did education, and maybe some of your grandparents did education, where they went to these all-age schools, right? So all ages were in I guess a class or a cell, based on their abilities or what have you, and also based on the idea that the older students were able to help the teacher by teaching the younger students. So it sounds a little bit similar to that. In this way, there are more models than the teacher, and pair group instruction can be utilized. You see what I was saying? Can be utilized for rote and drill, repetition and memorization exercises, thus freeing the teacher from those routines. So that's exactly what I just explained, like my grandparents went through, right? Horizontally, students can be grouped according to their skill mastery as determined by criterion tests designed for prescriptive and diagnostic purposes. But just what is a skill? Random House Dictionary, 1967, defines the word skill as follows. Number 1, the ability coming from one's knowledge, practice, aptitude, etc., to do something well. 2, competent excellence in performance, expertness, dexterity. 3, a craft or trade or job requiring manual dexterity or special training in which a person has competence and experience. The language is definitely career or vocational oriented. Skills are taught procedurally. It is not enough for the teacher to be a master of propositional knowledge, but he or she must know how to teach a person how to do something. Learning a skill presupposes learning the content of a discipline which dominates the skill. Olson talks about the 2 kinds of knowledge in his interesting and thought-provoking essay, what is, quote, what is worth knowing and what can be taught, end of quote. He says that knowledge per se does not make it possible to solve problems. Knowledge does not make it possible, per se, does not make it possible to solve problems. Hence, verbal knowledge is of limited usefulness, and an activity curriculum of the kind recommended by Dewey would be required for the achievement of a general and practical competence. Remember, we talked about Dewey a lot when we talked about Booker T's curriculum, right? When we talked about the work he did with the Tuskegee Institute, right? the fact that that Dewey gets all this acclaim and Booker T doesn't, when Booker T in actuality heavily changed the way they carry out education in the country, right? Hence, Dewey would be required for the achievement of a general and practical competence. Consequently, while we talk out of one side of our mouths about competency-based education and back to the basics, which essentially means a know-how curriculum based on procedural knowledge, we do little to change from learning from tests and teachers to one of learning through experience. During the Middle Ages, according to Olson, useful things were learned through apprenticeship. I talked about the master and the student earlier. This is what I was referring to, the apprenticeship period of learning. Gradually, with the spread of writing and the invention of the printing press by Gutenberg, the publication of textbooks altered the teaching style in the schools. Although lip service was given to learning by doing and through experience, observance was more often than not in the breach. Dewey argued persuasively for learning through experience and by doing. And McLuhan projected the thought that as much was learned from the primary effects of the medium itself as by content. That's a weirdly written. That's weirdly written. But it's funny that, you talk about Dewey. I believe she should have talked about Booker T in there as well. Thus, in spite of technology and the media, skills are still acquired primarily through performatory acts in the context of direct feedback from the environment or from specifically designed pedagogic devices or from a tutor, according to Olson. He feels that the most obvious way to acquire both skills and knowledge is through active attempts to achieve various goals in a variety of performatory domains. So what Booker T did, right, along those lines was, you're in school to learn construction. Why not build a school building? Why not fix and repair school buildings? Why not build school buildings? Why not build sidewalks? And along the way, right, as we learned in that episode that I did some time ago, along the way, not only are you learning how to build, but you're learning how to work out the mathematics of costs, right? You're learning to figure out how much you can charge for similar work as an adult. So that's how Booker T went about it. Olson describes three kinds of learning. One, direct experience, i.e. learning that a stove is hot by touching it. Two, modeling or observational learning, i.e. by seeing someone recoil from touching a hot stove. And three, through symbols, i.e. by hearing the sentence, the stove is hot. The use of symbols has become the most popular means of communicating in the teaching/learning environment of schools. Unfortunately, skills cannot be communicated in this way most of the time because teachers are confronted with large numbers of children who have to be taught in groups. You see, this is where Olson talked about the tutoring, right? At least in tutoring, you're being taught one-to-one, in the chat room, I see KWAZ Radio posts his YouTube. You follow their YouTube. Life with Nelly is here saying good evening. Make sure you all like and comment. Appreciate that. Check out Life with Nelly on YouTube as well. Jericho Kubu Photography says knowledge in your head is a static thing, like books in a library. Knowledge must be organized and applied to generate power. I agree with that. Coach Pete is here saying good evening. Good evening to Coach Pete. Daily Affirmations by Pauline is here saying good evening as well. You guys check out Daily Affirmations by Pauline. Especially check out her Facebook as well as her Instagram page. She always has something inspirational to say on social media on a daily basis. So check her out. Olson describes this effort. Now we're talking about the fact that skills cannot be communicated in in this way most of the time because teachers are confronted with large numbers of children who have to be taught in groups, right? What can be taught to a group of children? Only information which can be coded in the mass media. Knowledge is defined in terms of statements and propositions, and hence is communicable by definition. While knowledge may be represented in abstract symbolic forms such as sentences, which because of their symbolic structure can be conveyed through the mass media, skills cannot be conveyed through the mass media. Skills cannot be represented in such symbolic forms except in the roughest rules of thumb. The point that Olson makes so pointedly is that skills cannot be taught in groups by the present banking deposit pedagogy used in most of the classrooms in the United States. So back to the basics, and competency-based education is double talk, lip service, to the purpose of procedural knowledge without the means for practice. Yeah, procedural knowledge doesn't, just like rote memorization. And I think in a lot of ways what Derico Cooper photography just said is you could apply that to rote memorization, right? That rote memorization just sticks in your head as something you memorize, right? Like books in a library. But the real knowledge, right, has to be something that you put to work, right? And that's where, like, the Booker T Institute, the Tuskegee Institute, the Booker T developed, right, and conceived. That's why that worked better, right? Is, you know, I remember in my hometown being in science classes, because I went to a government school, which you all call a public school. I went to a government school, and because it was government school, like in chemistry classes and stuff, we looked at our teacher do the experiment. And we had to write a report on it and this, that, and the other. And I could always remember being, you know, sitting there and wishing that I could do it myself, that I could carry out the steps, but it was a question of resources. We didn't have the resources for every student or a few students, or a couple of students in a few groups, right, doing the work. The reality is that what we learned was like the procedure, right? And we didn't really necessarily oftentimes get the means to actually practice it. And that is what actually differentiated us in a government school from, say, those in a private school. In a private school, they were able to do some hands-on stuff, right? They were paying for their education. The monies or the proceeds helped to go towards them having some stuff, some resources to work with. And so they didn't just sit down and just watch a teacher all the time. They actually got an opportunity to practice what they saw, right? And that's a big difference in education. And one of the things that I'm looking into in this African-centered curriculum is the ability to, for example, in science study, to be able to own items that helps you do home or what's called citizen science, you know, with dollar store type materials, you know, cheap stuff from Amazon and from your local dollar store, right? So look for that in the future. To continue, what does this mean for the administrator who is managing for competency-based education, or back to the basics? He or she must find the most obvious way to acquire both skills and knowledge through active attempts to achieve various goals in a variety of performatory domains. Therefore, language, mathematics, music, and art must be developed into skill units, mastery of which is acquired through performatory acts as described above. Propositional learning can be taught in large group activities, while procedural learning requires small groups or a one-to-one encounter. Administrators must design a horizontal and vertical organization which will accommodate this need. Both non-grading and team teaching could provide such an experience if implemented properly and with the appropriate training for the personnel involved. Multimodal groupings of students and families will give the opportunity for large group activities, LGAs, and tutorials. So that's one of the other aspects of the African-centered curriculum that I'm pushing for, that it's not only just for children by age groups or by age grades per se, but I want it to be something that parents who haven't been initiated in an African-centered education, they work with their students and learn along with their children. I said students, but I mean their children, right? They work and learn along with their children and help reinforce each other's knowledge, right? Moreover, such groupings contain a built-in peer group modeling design, as mentioned earlier. Training for teachers in these methods would increase the proper use of open space environments, which are presently being criticized for malfunctioning. Unfortunately, open space environment personnel were never trained to utilize it properly, nor were the suitable philosophical underpinnings present for its effective use. Present on the faculties of many schools are industrial arts, art, instrumental and vocal music teachers, and coaches of football, basketball, baseball, and track who know how to present procedural knowledge to students. The talent and skills of these teachers should be used to help other teachers learn how to impart such knowledge. The social studies teacher who cannot teach reading, the science teacher who cannot teach mathematics, the elementary teacher who cannot teach art or music are symbolic of the problem we have in education today. You know, I always think about this one teacher I had in high school, Mr. Morgan. Mr. Morgan was a dude, he taught me physics, chemistry, he could teach biology, he could teach math, he could teach social studies. And by the way, he wasn't from my country, he was from Canada. He could teach social studies, he could teach, English, history, and I always admired that ability. And at the time, I didn't even fully understand what it really meant, right? And by the way, he was the basketball coach, won several tournament championships and all that kind of stuff, right? Brilliant guy, died a few years from a heart attack while teaching a few years ago. But I always think about him, and I think about what he did, and I think about his example, and he's one of the examples that we need to have more of around Black children, right? We need to have the teacher who you can't get through to them, say in social studies, the way you'd like to, but because you understand, right? Because you know how to do other things, you can get through to them through other subjects. You see? That's how you got to do it. A multicultural, multilingual, multimodal, and multidimensional curriculum is necessary because most Americans function within several cultures, including the mainstream culture. Banks suggest that students develop cross-cultural competency, which consists of attaining the abilities, attitudes, and understandings needed to function effectively within the universal American culture, within their own ethnic sub-societies and cultures. It is this re-education of American youth which will offset the racial hostilities and animosities which prevent the fulfillment of the promise of our representative democracy. The 4M curriculum supports multilingualism, which offers students the opportunity of learning different languages in their cultural context. We should no longer think of language as a college requirement or as a complementary education. Languages are necessary tools of communication. There is an increasing need and expanding market for bilingual persons in international politics and trade. Research clearly indicates that the earlier the training in a second language, the easier it will be for the child to use that language as a native speaker. Therefore, language should be introduced to the child at the very earliest possible age. The multidimensional aspect emphasizes the fact that human beings are different. Each person is unique in his or her own rate of growth and pattern of development. Such an understanding of human growth and development demands a variety of materials, teaching strategies, and administrative styles. Additionally, teachers must be assigned to groups large enough to permit large group instruction, as well as small group teaching. Also, enough personnel should be available for individual tutoring. Schools of education should begin studying these changes. Ray asks the question, quote, who will bring about these changes, end of quote. He insightfully notices that there are other ways to acquire knowledge, from pain and pleasure, extremes of heat, cold, pain, taste, and touch, which come through physiological sense systems. Olson considers these experiences or learning by doing. Ray adds that teachers are psychological and physiological experiences to impart knowledge and sometimes to discriminate or exercise personal prejudices. The training of teachers must include strategies for examining these characteristics. Remember, we did a show called on the profile of an Afrocentric teacher. If you guys weren't around for that episode, I suggest you go back and listen to that episode and listen to what it is to be an Afrocentric teacher. You know, that'll give you some game on what you need to be, and you don't have to be a board certified teacher to teach or be a part of conveying an African-centered curriculum, but you have to be immersed in African tradition and culture, in some African tradition and culture. Prospective teachers should begin working in schools as freshmen, acting as tutors, aides, and monitors, right? Sophomores should assume direct teaching tasks related to curriculum improvement as substitute teachers. Juniors should practice teach, and seniors should serve as full teachers. More importantly, education professors should provide more alternative styles of teaching and better methods of meeting the variety of learning styles which teachers meet in a culturally diverse student body. The 4M curriculum, moreover, has the following properties: a reorganization of the hierarchical skills for learning. Language, mathematics, music, and art occurs where each teacher is proficient in using each of these symbol systems for instruction. How do you guys feel about that? In fact, let me know what you feel about all of these points when it comes to the 4M curriculum. The first one, let me read it again, is the reorganization of the hierarchical skills for learning. For learning language, mathematics, music, and art. Right? Occurs where each teacher is proficient in using each of these symbol systems for instruction. So in other words, your teacher should be able to switch back and forth between, you know, skills that you use for learning language, skills that you use for mathematics, you know, like Derico Cooper for photography earlier talked about, you know, as well as Achieve Mindset talked about, you know, learning the history of mathematics, right? Learning the, you know, the skills for teaching art. Because, like I said earlier, some folks, they're good at language, right? They're good at learning English and doing literature and all that old shit. Some are really good at math. Well, yeah, a few are really good at math, right? But some are really into music and art. And if you could convey to a person how to play, you know, a guitar, a drum, if you could convey how to, you know, what it takes to teach a student art, and you could use, you know, those methodologies and whatever, you know, like, you know, whatever subject it is you teach, right? Let's say you teach history, but you could jump into the language teaching mode. You could jump into the mathematics teaching mode. You won't miss a child. You won't lose not one student in your class. You feel me? If you understand how to convey, how to teach sports, you won't lose one kid in your class. And going back to that teacher I had, Mr. Morgan, one of the things that was apparent even to me as a young guy in school when I had him as a teacher in high school, he got all the dudes who would have, and I'm being very serious about what I'm saying, all the dudes who would have been on some bullshit when it comes to school, through basketball, he was able to make them better students. I know some of those guys to this day, because of Morgan. Those guys went to Texas and all kind of school, junior colleges in Texas, and then on to other colleges, etc. Like, he made them be more than what they looked like they were going to be. And it's because I think he was able to get through to them from on the sports tip and bring that to the classroom tip on how to better be a student and stuff like that. You know, it's important. Dorico Cooper Photography says that language piece is so crucial. Opportunities to learn language by immersion is very important. Absolutely. Listen, instead of us having our children going to the public school system and learning French or Spanish, right? Like I've said in the past, I learned French in school. I couldn't tell you but more than 10 words in French now. It just didn't interest me that much. I did I did Spanish in college. I remember more than French, but it still doesn't really interest me that much. But if I had from a young age, or if your children had from a young age was learning Swahili, and the idea was like, yo, you can go to Africa, in most parts of Africa, and be able to communicate with people. Super important. Rico Cooper Photography says mathematics can be taught through music. Mathematics can be taught by photography. That's absolutely correct. If you ever picked up a guitar or try to learn to play the guitar, you know that there's something called tabs. Tabs use numbers to teach you how to play the guitar. Right? And there's other mathematical concepts you could work out through music. In fact, there's guys out here, no one knows them because the music goes over people's head, but a lot of guys create this music that's purely mathematical. In fact, what's his name? What is his name again? A black guy, Thelonious Monk. One of the most mathematical pieces of music is from Thelonious Monk. People study that. There's a particular piece. I'm forgetting right now what the piece is. People study that for how mathematical it is. Rico Cooper Photography says, I'm also a master scuba diver. And if you don't know mathematics, it can cost you your life. You see? You know, we got to be able to get to our children. If they're not doing well in math, use music, right, to get them up to where they need to be in math. Anyway, let me continue with this list. The next thing, an arrangement of the sequence of language and mathematics is evident so that the structure of the disciplines become relevant to the isolated skills learned previously, so that phases can be taught when the student is ready rather than when the system is ready. When the student is ready rather than when the system is ready. The rearrangement of the sequence of language and mathematics is evident so that the structure of the disciplines becomes relevant to the isolated skills learned previously, and so that phases can be taught when the student is ready rather than when the system is ready. The next one, the development of multilingual and multicultural content for teaching language, literature, journalism, speech, drama, music, art, history, geography, social science, and science is affected. I did an episode where I talked about like the words that were used, like how Africans count is different than what we do. How Africans traditionally count is different from how we count. And my thing is that if you have a curriculum that teaches, even if it teaches younger learners to count from 1 to 20, and then from 20 to 50, and then, you know, through to 100, you'll change the way that our children go about doing mathematics. Because the words that we use for numbers in a lot of traditional African languages changes your mindset about how you go about counting. Next one, the synthesis of special education services with the needs of students rather than the need of the system occurs. Tutoring for students having difficulty in geometry. Next, there is a utilization of multi-age, multimodal groupings for instruction, varying the teacher-pupil ratio to accommodate instructional rather than institutional goals. Just makes sense. Again, look up Booker T or look up the episodes I've done on Booker T in the past. You'll see where he used that to great results. The next one, the utilization of counseling and guidance services in both elementary and secondary schools appears to involve students in problem-solving situations, which result in positive solutions to student needs, problems, and/or grievances. Let me read that again. The utilization of counseling and guidance services in both elementary and secondary schools appears to involve students in problem-solving situations, which result in positive solutions to student needs, problems, and/or grievances. Next one, the coordination of career development courses with those disciplines necessary for this operationalization exists. For example, physics and auto mechanics. That's what I was saying earlier, right? If you learn physics just like a lot of us did in secondary school, just through kind of like rote memorization, word problems and stuff like that, you wouldn't realize just how much physics, is involved in auto mechanics. Like Derico Cooper just said in the chat room, you look at something like scuba diving and don't realize how much mathematics is necessary to preserve your life when scuba diving. Right? That's the problem with the school system. The school, respectfully, it's not so much that the school taught you shit that wasn't, you know, that you couldn't utilize. They didn't connect the dots for you. Right? When you learn about torque in physics, understand those principles apply to an engine. Or simple as removing a screw that's too tight. Right? When you learn about pulleys and levers and fulcrums, trust me, they use that basic, they use that knowledge to build upon the knowledge that they use to again, I'm going to say it, shoot rockets into the sky. They just never taught you how to connect the dots. And so if we're going to deal with an African-centered curriculum, it has to be one that connects the dots. The next one, the coordination of career development courses with those disciplines necessary for their operationalization exists. Physics and auto mechanics. I said it before. There is an integration of career development services with student needs. For example, work study or work services opportunities for future lawyers, and not just future lawyers. That's one of the things, like even you guys who with me now, who are photographers, right? Opportunities for the student in school who's learning the basics of photography to then be able to come and shadow an established photographer who's out here doing work, has a business, right? doing their thing, it'll be great for our students who are learning photography from our curriculum to be able to go and follow, the word is shadow, one of you guys, right? And lastly, there is an emphasis on learning by experience as well as by symbol systems. So symbol systems is the words or the sentences, right? The steps or the procedures, but then be able to go and actually do it. Through these changes, the curriculum is better suited to a diverse population and uniquely different human beings. Again, Sizemore and them are talking about a curriculum that's multicultural, so a lot of different groups of people can learn. We're talking about stuff, a curriculum that's really just for our people. And there's nothing wrong with creating a curriculum just for our people. Lastly, the 4M curriculum is characterized by testing based on specific criteria designed to determine the direction rather than scale. The norm reference curriculum has been failing minority and Black poor children for over 100 years and is buttressed by both the testing and the dependent textbook industries. Neither does much to facilitate human growth and development, but rather serves to sort human beings into winner and loser categories for the economy. That reminds me, I meant to ask this question earlier. How many of you feel like the education you got in school really either made you and your friends winners or made them losers? Do you feel like you came out of school with an education that made you a winner, that gave you the tools you need to win? Or did it just make you a loser? This brings us to a section called the effects of norm reference testing. The 4M curriculum requires radical systemic change. This change would be negated by the built-in norm reference testing budgets of competency-based education and back to the basics programs. In fact, in these programs, testing has replaced teaching in them as the prime pedagogical device. If we are to sustain the norm reference curriculum and the standardized tests which make it necessary, the following questions need answers. What information will a standardized test result give to a teacher about the learner? What diagnosis will it give for the individual learner? What skills will it assess? How will the teacher determine the rate of growth of the learner? How will the teacher determine the pattern of development of the learner? Those are good questions. Let me highlight that. Those are really good questions. And the more questions, it seems. How will the teacher assess the learning style? And how will he or she know the best method for teaching this learner? And that's always been a question I've had, right? Are you really comfortable as a teacher sitting up there giving students F's when you haven't really tried to access and assess the learning style for this particular student? You tried to do the same shit that the person who's coming first in class. I don't know if the States has first and last in classes here, but where I'm from, there's people who come first, right, and people who come last. How is that helpful to the learner? Have you not considered that maybe you're teaching in a way that resonates the best with who's coming first? And just not teaching to a style that resonates at all with those who come in last? Lastly, will the public be informed as to the student population's deviation from socioeconomic norms, as well as the achievement norms, racial norms, national adult norms? Grouping, testing, counseling, special education, and career development, placement, disciplinary practices, and promotion standards are all set by tests. Finally, prediction of success in college is determined by a test. Asa Hilliard. Okay, I'm glad she brings up Asa G. Hilliard here. Asa G. Hilliard III asks an interesting question. Who asked for prediction in the first place? His answer is the politicians. In a nation of minorities, the preferred minority is still the affluent, white, Anglo-Saxon Protestant male. The sorting mechanisms continue to work in his favor. They are stacked his way by the use of the norm as the unit of measurement. Hilliard urges that there is no cultural norm, linguistic norm, cognitive norm, or any other kind of norm in real human experience which can be apprehended by standard inquiry. He notes that the politics of normal distribution is the hard sell line which is used to legitimize the test as an objective method of disturbing the authoritative values of the nation. That's an interesting concept. That's something to think about. The Association of Black Psychologists also called for a moratorium on all standardized testing. And the National Association of Elementary School Principals has urged, quote, an intensive national inquiry into standardized testing, end of quote. All tests standardized on national norms derive their critical importance from a single factor known as predictability or predictive validity. Okay. Hopefully she explains that more. In an editorial note, Robert L. Williams says that standardized testing and the entire educational system are highly correlated. Both are based on monocultural assumptions and the notion of a single normal curve for all human abilities. As such, the educational system and standardized tests are Anglo-centric and ethnocentric, thereby ignoring the influx into society of other and different cultural groups. But y'all ain't hearing me though. I just read that, but y'all ain't hearing that though. Y'all ain't hearing that though. Both are based on one culture and the notion of a single normal curve for all human abilities. As such, the educational system and standardized tests are Anglo-centric and ethnocentric, right? Thereby ignoring the influx into society of other different cultural groups. More interestingly, an application of the norm concept to the construction of a value continuum results in the definition of, quote, a good school being one where the students achieve all the national norm, which really means that half of the students fail. So you guys, before, I come from a place where at one time everyone was receiving this British education and taking this British exam, which is, you know, similar to a standardized test. And to their credit, a lot of the educators at a certain point, I want to say late 80s, early 90s, started talking about the fact that this exam, I don't say the name of the exam, is called the GCE O levels or the ordinary levels, right? This exam doesn't reflect the norms of the Caribbean children who were taking the exam. And so you had a lot of in fact, you had a lot of students who just didn't take it. Much less those who got subpar grades in it. And so the educators, to their credit, created a country-specific exam, but in their short-sightedness, I would like to say, it was based on another British exam. Right? We have to start taking full responsibility of our education systems. We cannot just Africanize, right? Or black it up. We cannot just Africanize other people's exams and then think, okay, well, now it's suitable for our people. No. We have to understand our people and create an educational system that reverberates, right? That reverberates with our people. In the chat room, Daily Affirmations by Pauline just said, I hated the BJCs, right? The BJCs was another one of those examples. At least that was supposed to be, you know, Daily Affirmations and myself, we're from the same place. We went to the same school system, different years, but, you know, I know what she's talking about. She knows what I'm talking about, right? The BJCs were just a Bahamianization of another British exam, you know. Let me finish this paper and then I'll deal with the other comments. Understanding these facts does not undermine the obdurate resistance to the abolition of norm reference testing. Chuck Stone has an explanation for this obstinacy. Stone informs us that the SATs were constructed by an organization which has become the psychometric monopolist in the $250 million testing industry. According to him, in 1974, the Educational Testing Service, or ETS, in a financial statement revealed that the quote-unquote testing godfather, ETS, bled the American people out of, what's that, almost $54 million. That 1974 income represented an increase in just 5 years of over 14 million. The recent decline in SAT scores has been interpreted as a decline in achievement of learners. This explanation resulted in a stampede for competency-based education, back to the basics, increased testing, and flunking. Few people who advocate the maintenance of standardized testing have ever had to prove that they could teach anybody anything with them. Just what tests do besides rank and sort is continuously debated. Tests dependent on norm reference curricula are biased against the unique demands of Black, Spanish-speaking, poor, and handicapped children. These children, who differ from the Anglo-centric norms, must develop survival skills necessary to function in the hostile environment of the schools. And that's a hell of a truth right there. When the schools aren't really offering you anything to glom onto, and you start focusing on disruptive behavior, now you're going to have those who are disruptive and those who have to respond to the disruption. So that's where the kind of bullying and all that kind of stuff comes in. Again, it's for losers and it's for winners. And even within losers, there could be a winner class, right? Those who, they're losing, but at least they're shitting on someone else, right? So they're quote unquote winning. And then there's the absolute loser who not only is being, you know, lost in the system of education, but is also being bullied out of it as well. Their success then is dependent on these skills, giving them an extra burden not required of Anglo-Saxons. Much of the advantage of the Black poor, many of them tend to be prepared early for independence and survival, rather than for academic and intellectual pursuits. By the way, you parents need to be better too. Stop with this bullshit where you're just waiting for your kid to get 18 so you can push their ass out into the world. Let me tell you something, at 18, ain't no kid know how to deal with this world. Unless you push them out at 12. This training permits them to remain alive, but it does not facilitate their easy absorption into American economic mainstream. This is because a mismatch occurs between the Black child's background experiences and the required circumstances he encounters in school. Williams admonishes us to accomplish a match by making a Black child's new learning experiences related to the material already in his mental storage. These are the skills which help him to survive and learn. The problems of black students largely center around discipline, learning, and self-concept. To alleviate these problems, educational strategies compatible with the growth rates and development patterns, learning styles, cultural heritage, and socio-linguistic experience are needed. Desegregation and integration models either rarely address this issue or seem to eliminate the imputation of black inferiority or the exigencies of prior deprivation. The mixing of the races must be accomplished by a greater curricular matrix. You see, that's what she's on. The differences between human beings, male and female, black and white, affluent and poor, and in religious and ethnic groups must be acknowledged by the school system. Some kind of change must appear to relieve the disparity which results from neglect. The lack of positive leadership in the area of education in the American community is unfortunate. The retreat of the black elite from social activism directed against the system's deficiencies has deepened the chasm between black affluent and the black poor, although black studies programs attempt to correct this flaw in undergraduate education. The black elite, really and truly, they don't mind the chasm. Broussard comments about this in this way. It presents patterns unique black undergraduate education promises to address only personal needs by supplying upward mobility to the gifted, patient, or determined few. All of this will happen at the expense of strengthening wider functional education and advanced literary diffusion among the masses of black and oppressed people. Skewed individual progress at the expense of bigger shares of literacy, diffusion, and internal development, an unstated but growing crisis in the midst of black American institutional life, promises to detach educated black elites from their membership group and to promote unresolved conflicts and separate goals between educated black elites and the black masses. Old patterns of racial solidarity, the backbone of much of the organization, and struggle against second-class citizenship and unequal development suddenly begin to crack and thereby leave a growing black poor without its talented tenth for advanced leadership and completed struggle against inequality. Human variation remains the enduring educational enigma because we are not able to absorb everyone who would be competent and trained into the economic system. There is an incompatibility between our political ideology, which guarantees equality, freedom, and rationality to all, and our economic system, which is competitive and interdependent, requiring numbers of people to lose. From this incompatibility, there emerges an educational system which purports to guarantee equal opportunity for all, but which actually maintains social privileges and social classes in a stratified society. Naturally, then, there will be losers in the schools of the United States. No change in this category will occur until the problem of human difference is faced and the scope of human nature which Hawkins presented is accommodated. The 4M curriculum offers this opportunity. Once human variation is provided for, equality will exist in educational programs, and on the postulate of equality, freedom and rationality rests. And that's the end of the paper. I hope you guys were able to get something from that paper. I always try to bring something that you can get something from, right? The 4M curriculum is a curriculum of inclusion, if we're being honest, but at the same time, it's definitely a strong idea. There's some points in how it is to be carried out that's strong enough for us to use, right, in our work to build a curriculum. Let me go back to the chat room and see what I missed. Let me go back and see what I missed. Achieve Mindset earlier said there is a lack of parents having good teaching skills. That's why the African-centered curriculum that we're talking about is also an adult education program as well, because the idea of it is for both to learn. Like we talked about these different modalities where you have learning based on knowledge, exposure, as opposed to just learning by age, right? So you're able to bring in older folks, like adults, like adult learning, right, into also teaching the children that we're trying to get to, right? So you're right. There are parents who lack good teaching skills, but if we do this curriculum the right way and we have the right actual teachers who are conveying, you know, the curriculum, we should then be able to create better parents who have better abilities to teach children, or their children and the children around them. By the way, we have about twice as many listeners as we have likes. Make sure you guys hit the like button. I know some people like to be quiet and in the background, but it doesn't hurt you, and it actually helps me. And it doesn't hurt you at all. It takes a second. Click the thumbs up button, right? So your likes can be registered. And if you're new here, click the subscribe button as well. Draco Cooper Photography says learning vocabulary is crucial. It is the point at which we as a people begin to fall behind. The vocabulary and those standardized tests are not used in the home. You know, I always remember something about Malcolm X. When Malcolm X was in prison, he had this thing where he studied the dictionary. And it's my belief that his studying of the dictionary, and by the way, I tried to do it at a certain age, very difficult to do on your own, right? But what you will notice is that, as Derico Cooper is kind of alluding to, the kids who really work on their vocabulary, they do well on these standardized tests, and they tend to do better in college and all this kind of stuff too. And that's something that we gotta, you know, again, crucial point. That's something that we have to remember to put into our curriculum. So thanks for that. KW Don 7 is in the room. KW Don 7 says going into a public school system without an African-centered consciousness is a disaster for an African child. I know from experience. If I had known who my enemy was, I would have moved differently. Absolutely. Absolutely. That's why we have these children now who think they can do anything their white peers, I was going to say friends, but I'll just leave it at peers. They think they're white, they can do the same things that white peers do. That's just not the case. If those children had had an African-centered education, right, we could have saved a lot of those kids. In fact, the young lady who ran out there to swing a knife the other day, if she had an African-centered education, her parents failed her. They showed her mother failed her. That's a fact. She wouldn't have run out there threatening to stab somebody, right? Derico Cooper Photography says, for example, when is the last time you have used perturbed in your home? You know, funny enough, I use perturbed all the time. I actually do use perturbed all the time. We know what mad or pissed off means, but you will see perturbed on the test. Absolutely. Let me tell you something. These guys, and sometimes I see it in these papers too, by the way, that I read. These guys will ring off a sentence using words that they could have just made that so much more simple. But you have to remember, when they're writing, a lot of these guys, when they're writing certain papers, they're writing for a certain audience. Mostly their peers who are doing similar writing. They're not really writing for the layman. But you're absolutely correct. Most people, if you walk into the house and say, well, I'm so perturbed, they'll be like, what the fuck happened to you? Rico Cooper says he agrees with KW Don 7, what I read earlier. KW Don 7 says the parents of my generation just wanted Yurugu to validate their children are smart. They never gave any pushback to the miseducation system. Achieve Mindset asks a question. Interesting question. How do you learn language by immersion? Okay, I'll give you an example, Achieve. Achieve, I think you've been in the past when I've read these African stories. Like different groups, by different groupings in Africa, right? The Zulu, etc. Right? What's it called? The Hottentots, the Zulus, etc. Right? Imagine if you did that reading in English, which I imagine is your first or second language, and then you did that same reading in Swahili. So when they refer to a dog, in some, because a lot of stories I was reading, revolved around like cultural things, like the animals that they usually interact with, or the food, or what have you. Imagine then reading that same story in Swahili, or perhaps reading it in the original Swahili text, if it's a Swahili story, right? And then as you read, not only reading it from the English and then to the translation, but then looking in deeper into some of the customs that the story is talking about. And again, you're doing this in Swahili, a simple or whatever language the story is in. Let's say you're reading a language in Zulu, from the Zulu people, and you're learning to count your numbers 1 to 10, 11 to 20, and so forth and so on. That's how you could learn a language, by being immersed. KW Don 7 says Yurugu always tried to railway African children into remedial classes. Yeah, that's there. I talked about this a couple weeks ago. I've known people close to me in my life, and even myself to a certain extent, where people said they were slow and all kind of stuff. They weren't slow. I know someone who, as a youth, their parents took them to some psychological evaluation shit. And back then it was done by, white folks, the British. And the folks told them, told the mother that this child is retarded. I know the person. Or I should say, no, I knew the person. And I knew the person as a youth, like a young man, right? And that guy wasn't retarded. That guy ended up getting messed up later on. That's how important that shit is. That guy ended up getting messed up later on and not fully functional, but that guy wasn't retarded. I know him as a youth. He was not retarded. But that's the system that these folks are eager to kind of railroad you into, as KW Don 7 said. Rico Cooper Photography says to Daily Affirmation by Paulie, and I hear you. At SAT, ACT, ASVAB, GRE, GMAT, LSAT, and MCAT to the list. Absolutely. KW Don 7 says, I would never want my offspring to experience the educational experience that I had. Being around Yurugu and dealing with the constant racism and N-word was horrific. Man, that must be horrible. I didn't have that around me. That had to be horrible. He goes on to say the same people who used to use the N-word with me back then wouldn't sneeze in my direction now. Right? Dorico Cooper Photography reminds everyone listening, hit the like button to show your attendance. Right? Daily Affirmation by Pauline says vocabulary and grammar are key to many tests. Speaking properly also helps with testing. Dorico Cooper Photography says absolutely. Speaking, proper grammar is important for these people's tests especially, right? And they know that. They know that, right? Draco Cooper makes a point that's funny as hell, but it's important to understand. It says English is read left to right, Arabic right to left, Chinese top to bottom. Here's the thing about that though. If you can master those languages, it requires, and there it goes. Just what I was about to say. Draco Cooper Photography says different languages require you to think differently. So if you as a person right now, let's say you were to take up, well, let's say you speak English already and you were to take up Arabic. I don't know why, but let's say you took up Arabic, right? You have to change your mindset. You have to change the way you approach stuff. Chinese, same thing. I prefer our people go and find languages that will allow them to integrate themselves, if not reintegrate themselves, into an African culture. We need to have what I call an African obsession. If we want to fix our problem, we need to have what I call an African obsession. To that end, before I wrap up here, if you guys have, like in a PDF format or something, EPUB or whatever, if you guys have like African comic books, African graphic novels, right? Pass those along. I have a good friend of mine, and I always remember when he told this to me. He told me when he was a child, he wasn't reading great. But when he started reading comic books, he was reading 2 and 3 grade levels above his grade. And the reason there is simple. In the comic, you have the visual action with the written word. Language is supposed to be learned where you have a word, right? And you have the interpretation if it's not in your language or what have you. The usage of the word, especially something that's visual, right? This is where Ebonics and stuff come from. Ebonics is African folks trying to emulate what they hear without really having the grounding. They have no imagery, right? They have no imagery, so they're just, because if African folks had the imagery of the word, say devil. I was just reading something recently, and I think it was, who was talking? It was Booker T. In Booker T's book on character building. So he was talking to a man. The man says, well, ain't no devil gonna tempt me no more. If that man had able to see the written word, he would have known that devil is with a V, not with a B. So if you guys have like children's stories in African languages, like Swahili in particular, would be great. But anyone I'll take. You have comic books, graphic novels, that kind of thing. Pass those along, join the Discord. The link is pinned to the top of the chat, right? And also it's down in the description of this episode, right? I want to thank all you guys for coming through. I want to remind you guys about the curriculum that we're trying to build. You have an expertise or you have a passion about this curriculum, hit me up on the Discord, let me know. If you decide, like Draco Cooper Photography said, hey, I'm a photographer, I want to be integral in the creation of a photography curriculum, boom, that's the kind of thing you got to do. You can say the same thing for construction. You can say the same thing for auto mechanic. You could say the same thing for whatever. Let's do the work. Let's get it done. Draco Cooper Photography says there are different types of dictionaries for specific understanding. For example, Black's Law Dictionary. Traveling by car is not the same as driving. Absolutely. Right? So anyway, I appreciate you guys tuning in. I hope you guys tune in with me on Saturday. We're going to do Shoot the Breeze again. Make sure to drop your comments earlier in the chat room. I saw Daily Affirmations by Pauline drop some on the Discord. I'm fine. I'm cool with that too. But if you come in early and drop it in the chat room early, that means when I come in, I could just start hitting them as I read down the points. Yes, Daily Affirmation by Pauline says reminder of topics for Saturday. So whatever topics you wanna drop, you can hit me up on the Discord or hit me up earlier in the chat room on the live stream, and we'll get to it. I want to thank everyone. Let me quickly go through Derico Kubu Photography, Peace Family to you. Daily Affirmations by Pauline was here. KW Don 7 was here as always. Coach Pete was here. Life with Nelly was here. Thank you guys. NYC Beauties was in the house. Achieve Mindset was here. Who else? Kevin Care 42 was here. NYC Sports Archives was here. And I think that's everyone who was here. I appreciate you all. I'll see you on Saturday. Peace.
Thanks for listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast with your host, Koku. If you like what you just heard, we hope you pass along our web address, bittermedicineblogs.com, to your friends and colleagues, and share our show to all your social media. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. This has been a KWAZ radio production. Join us next time for another session of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Follow us on Facebook at Bitter Medicine Show, Twitter, Bitter Meds, Tumblr, Bitter Meds, Instagram, Bitter Medicine.